Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Estate Change. This is my second series. I'm now in episode, 4 or 5. I can't quite remember which one it is. There's been so many already. But I'm so pleased to be joined by Cecilia, the CIO, or Chief Information Officer. Is that right, Cecilia?
That's right. Chief
I
Information
never really
Officer.
know what the I means anymore. There's innovation, there's information, there's all forms of things. From Urban Edge Properties. Cecilia, would you mind just giving everyone a little bit of an introduction as to who you are really and sort of that role that you have within Urban Edge would be great.
Sure. Well, Cecilia LI, Chief Information Officer of Urban Edge Properties. We are a New York Stock Exchange real estate investment trust, and we focus on managing, acquiring, developing, redeveloping retail real estate in urban communities. Primarily in the Washington, D.C. to Boston corridor. And we have about 150 employees, and we own 76 properties totaling 17.2 million square feet.
That's quite an awful lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you said there's how many employees? 150. 150. And how many of those sort of held within that scope of maybe that innovation, technology, data, and that sort of area that you frequent?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a very unique structure in that we like to we run a very lean technology team in-house, and we outsource a lot of our innovation or tech roles, so to speak.
Now that's really interesting. I didn't realize that. So maybe we can come back to that in terms of that being part of that sort of strategic perspective of that innovation journey that you're on later on, because a lot of people that I talk to they do everything in the house, and maybe they're generally that sort of discussion is we're going to bring innovation in the house, we're going to do it all ourselves, and the question is whether they build solutions or they buy solutions. What you're now presenting is a slightly different thing on that, which is that the outsource of the intellectual property of that role. So I think that's really interesting as an instant. So yeah, thank you so much for that. So for those of you perhaps who are watching this live, and by all means watch it live, but normally this is all about the editing process that I do afterwards. So what you'll find in this series, it's quite succinct, it's quite structured in the format that we do, so that we can pull together some really interesting edits and cuts after the event. But if you are watching this live, please do ask some questions. I do like to pull in any questions or comments as we go through the interview process. So if you're watching this on Twitter or on YouTube or LinkedIn, wherever you are watching it, don't hesitate to put some questions in. But I have to say, Cecilia, there's no way I could do this series if it was just me on my toddle. And so as a consequence, I have to thank sort of 3 partners that I have. The first is in fact, the company that I said 4.5 years ago. And I've moved to a non-exec chairman role now within Unissu, but really they focus on PropTech Procurement. Secondly, and very importantly, Equiem. I was really appreciative this week. I actually went to one of their events this Wednesday evening, and it was a fantastic discussion around all of these customers of theirs, looking at sort of how they run their buildings, and really they're really super focused on transforming workplaces into really fantastic sort of world-class destinations is the term that they use. And then lastly, just this morning, I started my first leadership course with Oxford University and State Business School. I can't recommend the stuff that they're doing enough. It's a really good thing to look at if you are interested in, like me, trying to improve yourself as a leader in the space. And talking about leaders, that's why we have Cecilia here today to talk to us. So Cecilia, without further ado, what I'd like to do, I would like to, cool. So actually we've already had some, so Nazim has already come in. So Nazim, Milan, I haven't seen you for a long time, my friend. I hope you're well. Interesting question about...
Hello.
There we go. Right. I'm going to bring that in at the end because that'll be an interesting one. So really for my first question, Cecilia, one of the things I ask all of my interviewees is about that role that innovation plays within the company. So would you mind just expanding a little bit, please, in terms of what that sort of outlook is and that sort of holistic strategy that perhaps you have with Urban Edge Properties?
Sure. Look, innovation is front and center and highly encouraged at Urban Edge Properties. It is, in fact, part of our culture. If you take the meaning of innovation, right, it's nothing but simply the implementation of new ideas or a new way of thinking, right? Now, it just so happened that because we live in an era that is tech-driven, that it is almost difficult to not think about innovation without technology.
Yeah, agreed.
So, it is my responsibility as the CIO to find ways to enable innovation in our organization. But to do this, we have to be very clear on who we are as a company. And to that end, we as Urban Edge, we know that we're not a tech firm, but we are a technology-forward company who's not afraid to implement new tools, so long as those tools provide solutions to problems and it helps drive NOI.
Which is net operating income, as I've found out just recently, because it seems to be a real focus for other innovators that is almost one of the sort of the core incentives or the core measures of success, which is what's the impact on net operating income. Would you say that's a fair assumption, that it's your sort of your mantra, your goal to increase that? Is that fair?
100%. It's think of it as what moves the needle, right? It's the bottom line. And look, it doesn't always have to be about dollar signs, right? It could be about efficiency gains, right? But if you think about efficiency gains, ultimately it will have or should have an impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, and I find it quite interesting, and I've talked a lot about the misaligned incentives when it comes to building innovation strategies, and there always does seem to be this sort of quandary and almost battle between short-term incentives and long-term incentives. And I would argue that NOI is both a short and a long-term, and there is always a risk with innovation of failing very early on. And perhaps we'll come on to that a little bit later on. But I also like the fact that you're talking about the values and the culture at Urban Edge about being innovation first. And I think you use the term technology forward. Could you expand on that just a second? I've never really heard that phrase used before.
What do you mean by that, shouldn't I?
Sorry?
I said I should coin that phrase.
Yeah, I know. Technology forward. What does it mean?
Well, look, it means, like I said, we're not a tech firm, right? That there are companies that are tech firm, and then they have a whole division where they then have a whole tech arm, and that becomes investments and so forth. For us, we're tech forward in that we embrace technology. We're not afraid of it. I mean, just last year, over the last 3 years, it's on an average, we do about 90 initiatives, technology initiatives a year. And look, they could be small or large, but I do keep count of all the work that we do. And it's impressive, right? Imagine that, right? You have a company that has all the different people in the organization that have their day-to-day operations, and to have the appetite or the time to work on a technology initiative, that speaks volumes about the culture of our company, right? In that we embrace technology because we have gotten to a point where we understand the value that technology brings to the organization.
Yeah, I would think so. And it's like a positive feedback loop, isn't it? Which is, if you're technology forward or technology first, it then wraps itself around that culture with people thinking about innovation and technology all the time, which then feeds in that feedback loop coming around. So that does
and later on, I'll if we get to that, I'll expand on how we got to that, right? On how we got to that culture, because a lot of it had to do with people.
Oh, amen. So let's take a little look outside of that Urban Edge side. I'm really interested, and I know a lot of the people that listen in to these interviews are always interested in the personal journey that these innovators have. So I'm just wondering, what did your journey look like to become the CIO at Urban Edge Properties? What journey did you go on?
All right. Depends how far back I should go. But, I didn't really start thinking that I was going to become a technologist. In fact, it was a completely different career path. It was on design, fashion design, which clearly I did not do. But at the time when the internet boom happened, I realized that this was something interesting, and I decided to join that path. Um, and I started as an intern for a real estate brokerage company as a help desk.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, you really were right at the bottom of the entire stack, as
Oh
it were.
yeah, at
Wow.
the very bottom. Um, and it's funny because as a help desk, yes, you have the day-to-day problem solution. But one thing that intrigued me was how is it that people are still working on pen and paper and in trying to work solve business problems with so much paper, right? Um, and I also like to observe. So I was one thing that caught my mind is I was looking at how the CIO of the time at that company was operating and the reaction of the clients, right, the brokers. What I noticed is that people wanted change, wanted things that work for them that will make their lives easier, but they wanted to be communicated with. They wanted to know every single step of the journey and they wanted to be included in it, and that got piqued my interest. And so I spent several years in that company and changed roles in that company. And I was very fortunate because the CIO of the company saw something in me and said to me, Cecilia, uh, there's an opportunity at this company where they're looking for an IT manager. You should really give it a shot. And I did. I was very young. I was 20, I think 24 years old, and I had my first management role.
Wow.
And oh my goodness, I was very fortunate because they hired me saying, we have a few issues with our emails, and we have a terrible website. And I said, sure. I mean, I handle that all the time. That seems easy. Let me take a look. Joined the company, and what I realized is that yeah, you have they have website that really needs some help, but what's driving your website is your database, and your database is a mess. And how do you do e-commerce when your database is just not in top shape? So that became a whole ERP system journey, which then led to the a business transformation actually. And you know, to my surprise, from an e-commerce standpoint, the company was had programs, and in a given day they had an opening, and people will line up on that building 2 blocks around the building to sign up for the program. And when we launched our e-commerce site, our new e-commerce site, the number of revenue that it took us an entire day to receive, we got it within 1 hour. And I was like, wow, this is really exciting, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and just like that,
But how did you then go from that into the Urban Edge role that you've got now? I mean, was it a role that was created for you? Was it one that was there and you were headhunted in? How did that come about?
let me think about this for a second. I was I was actually on maternity leave at the time, and I
Oh.
was looking for a job. Um, and I realized that there was a company called Urban Edge Properties that was having a position that had a position open, and it was looking for. I mean, it was exactly what I had done prior to my maternity leave job, right? I was working for a private equity in high street retail.
Okay.
And I also as the head of technology for that company, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I want. And I reached out to the company, and I was very lucky. This is a very small industry, and at the time there were many people that I knew that worked for that company and that were consulting for that company. And yeah, so I got the pleasure to meet the executive team. Apparently, they like me, and I'm still here.
It is amazing. In a lot of the work that I've done over the last couple of years, no more than that, around understanding the innovators more, and in particular the innovator roles that they have. And I find it quite fascinating about how many of those leadership roles, like yours, which are almost they're generated for that person. They haven't had that role beforehand, and it's a really interesting discussion to have with the people perhaps that have had to build out their roles and build out their job descriptions as to what they look like. So I still think we're in that time of the market, and we will be probably for 4 or 5 years as the industry starts to try to understand how it develops from here with roles like yours. So just, I suppose now, just dipping back into some of the things that you've already said, you talked about culture being so important at Urban Edge. I just want to understand, what does culture mean to you in a brief sort of overview?
It's been spoken way of being that reflects values.
Yeah. And do the values underpin the culture?
Do the values depend on the culture? I think it's it kind of, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? Yeah. your culture defines your values, but people change, the world changes, values changes, and that defines culture, right? And typically organizations have their set culture and their set values, and you grow with it.
Yeah, and you're true, and they change and they morph and they evolve, and I think, especially during a period of digital transformation, when everything is in flux and everything is changing, it's really important to be constantly revisiting both aspects of that, because unless you have your culture and your values spelt out so everybody understands them from the top of the organization to the bottom, you have not got an aligned vision as to where that company is going, and it's a classic form of leadership challenge to make sure everyone is aligned along that.
Yeah.
So I suppose with all of that in mind, when we're talking about culture and values, and I'm really interested in your take on what does leadership mean for you in your role as a CIO at Urban Edge?
Wow. What does
It's so
leadership
personal,
mean?
right? That's the thing with leadership. Everyone is different in the way that they do it. So I'm finding it a fascinating insight. So yeah, I'd love to hear more.
I think that throughout my journey, and as I look at my career, there's things that I've learned along the way where I'm going to summarize into 3 things. One is, you have to have a strong and tireless work ethic, because you can't succeed alone.
Yeah.
Right. But because you can't succeed alone, you also need to have a village in order to get there. And then finally, once you have that village, you must take care of your village.
Yeah.
And that, to me, are like the 3 things I have learned along the way in my career that are really, really important from a leadership standpoint. Of course, there's many things that go with it. It will go within each of them, right? Communication and empowering and all of that. But those would be the 3 things that I would think summarize.
I've never heard it described that way, and it took me a while then to realize what you were saying. But as I was writing it down and mulling it over, you're absolutely right, because let's use that analogy of the village. What the village gives you is not a group of the same person that is part of your team. What you're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, is a real mixture of personalities, types, skills, interests, which form this this character of a team, and then you've got to nurture that team to get the best out of it. Would that be
That's right.
the best way of
That's right.
summarizing what you
And
mean?
by a team, I'm not just talking about the technology team. I'm
Yeah.
talking about the organization. In order to be successful, and let's talk about in the technology world, right? As a chief information leader, so to speak, right? Being a leader, you're not just leading your team. You're leading an organization. You're leading an effort. You're leading a journey, right? And to be able to do that, you need everybody within the organization to get there, right? And that's the village that I'm talking about. I'm building solutions for the people that are doing the day-to-day operations. They are the people who know all the all the things that are the ins and the outs and the examples and the case studies. It would be crazy to build a solution without their input, without their thought process, right? Without them being involved in the journey. And this is what I'm talking about, the village, right? You have to have everybody in it to be able to be successful.
Yeah, and it goes both ways, right? In that village community, you've got to talk to them, they've got to talk to you, you've got to listen, you've got to communicate, and so on and so forth. So that makes perfect sense. So I suppose taking that on another level, when you've talked about leadership being about bringing people with you, I'm really just interested in a short insight about digital transformation. Then, what does that mean to you in your role of CIO at Urban Edge?
What does what mean?
Digital transformation. How does that manifest itself in your role?
It's a journey. It's a journey to adopt technology by the organization with the goal to improve efficiency, create value, and innovate.
Oh, that was really short, succinct, and lovely. Oh, I really like that one. That was, in fact, I can't even write it down quick enough. I always try to try and write it down so I can refresh my memory. It goes into my memory, Cecilia, but that was so well put. I think I've even missed out some of it as well. So let's just revisit this form of leadership, if you don't mind, because you're very lucky to be in a position of power now as a CIO. You've had a fascinating journey, which we've already discovered. But I'm really interested, given that journey you've been on, what tip would you give other future leaders in this sort of space around, in your case, information or data or innovation technology? What tips would you give them?
I mean, aside from the three things that are really important for me as a leader, those three are key ingredients for success. But
because obviously from an edit's perspective, that will not be included. So you're talking about strong, tireless work ethic. You're talking about, you cannot succeed alone. So you've got to build that sort of community of people around you, which you've termed a village. And then you've got to make sure that you can look after that village as well. So just to reference those 3 points you've made earlier on. So
that's correct.
So what tip would you give them?
But on top of that, I would say communicate. Communication is the key to success. Upwards, downwards, sideways, and it's not just one time. It's repetitive conversations, awareness. It's just the relationship forming. If you want to become a leader, you must communicate.
So to take that on then, perhaps, because it can be very easy to say to people, you need to communicate more. What form of communication would you recommend has worked best for you in that role that you now have?
Sure. I mean, let's be very practical, right? We have like I said, 100 initiatives, right, this past year. And how does one keep up with all those initiatives, right? Think about it per department, right? So we hold, aside from meetings for that particular initiative, we hold monthly meetings with the department to give them an update on all of the things that we're working on for their department and other initiatives that we may be working with other departments that may impact them.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times I've received feedback of how much they appreciate that meeting, that update, because it doesn't have to be long, by the way. It's just a 30-minute update on where we are and what is next.
Incredibly valuable. And in particular, you did mention it's not just about the department that you're supporting, but the ancillary departments that may be impacted by it. Which allows for that cross-department communication, which is obviously much missed, I'm afraid, in much larger organizations. So I completely understand why you said that.
And you know what's funny is that is not just to update people, but that also feeds onto that value and the culture creation that we talked about before, because people start thinking, oh my goodness, yes, all these people are also utilizing technology. This is how they're using it, and I didn't realize you're also using this. And now all of a sudden, you're creating a culture where now you have two different departments talking to each other and say, hey, you know what? I heard that you guys are working on this. Can you tell me a little bit about it? Because I think I might be able to use something like that. And then they start brainstorming, and then they come to us and say, we would like X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when you've got buy-in from everybody, when people are starting to communicate between themselves about the benefits of doing certain things in a certain way, and well, maybe you should try it. That's wonderful, isn't it? When you've actually got people being proactive about, have you thought about this? Could we trial that? I mean, that's the best position you can ever be in, right?
That's right. But that was not like that on day one, right?
No.
You have to create that. I remember at the beginning of our journey where we had departments where say, I'm sorry, we just don't have the time. I mean, we're really busy here. And, what can you do that can really improve my life?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I quickly realized is that it was the individual's experience that perhaps they didn't really have that partner, that technology partner that worked with them to really sit down and understand their needs and say, it's okay, why don't we just have a conversation, right? And then getting their buy-in, getting their opinion, getting their input, right? And really building a solution with their needs in mind.
Completely agree. So let's just move on. I'm going to do one more question before I go into some wordplay. Because from the sounds of everything that you've talked about already, you're obviously on quite a journey with Urban Edge. And just to sort of recap, you're talking about 70 plus buildings, over 17 million square feet, sort of operated within. And I'm just interested about the frustrations that you've had about any innovation processes that you follow. What have you had so far to deal with, or what is your frustration about the process? Maybe
cost, time, buy-in.
Hang on. So tough, time, and buy-in.
Cost, right?
Yeah.
Time and buy-in, right?
Cost, time, and buy-in. Right. Go on. Expand on that.
Yeah. So cost, right? Especially with the current economy and what we're living in, right? It's hard to justify the spend of XXX dollars, right, in order to build a solution that who knows if you're going to have a true return on investment, right? And so this is the times where we really have to ask ourselves, is the juice worth the squeeze, right?
Yeah.
And then the time, right? People are busy. I said that before. They need time to work on their 9-to-5 job or their daily operations. And then on top of that, work on a side project. Most people engage in a technology project out of a reaction to an unfavorable situation, right? Take COVID-19 as an example. right? Or the flood that we have, the blackout that we had. A lot of these technologies, DR, right, disaster recovery, a lot of it had been for some companies out of an unfavorable situation, a reaction to an unfavorable situation, right? And then the last one is buy-in, right? It's the challenge is to find the best way to convince people that a solution can help solve their problem they're facing, right? And if you manage to do that, then you need to set expectations because they want the problem solved now, right this minute, right? And then they want the solution to be seamless. And I think I wouldn't call it biggest frustration, but definitely challenges that are top of mind.
Yeah, and from the sounds of what you're talking about there is that third reference point of buy-in, it sounds as if the cost and the time function that you talked about is very much, well, actually, maybe not. Maybe the time is on people of your level and sort of general members of staff because they've got to get buy-in to expend their time to help things. And then the cost element is going upstream in terms of justifying the expense. Is that a fair sort of break? So buy-in is almost total, but the cost buy-in is upstream and the time buy-in is perhaps level and downstream. Is that fair?
Yeah, that is fair. But we have, I mean, understanding that, cost, time, and buy-in is a points of considerations to every major project that we do. We have a process in place to make sure that we are addressing all 3 points. And only if we're able to address all 3 points, those projects move forward.
Yeah. So just to sort of confirm what you're saying. So we've actually, so Nazim, just to sort of reference, because I know you're watching, which is very kind of you. The return on investment, totally agree. So we've actually got, we have some agreement in the mix on there. So that's good to see. So what I'm just going to do, let me just come off of that for a second. Just going to hide his question. So that was really interesting. Thank you. I'm going to go now onto an area that we talked about at the start before we sort of went live here, which was you said, "Oh man, you've really challenged me on this," which is a single word to describe another word, and I said, "Good, I'm quite pleased. It's been a challenge." So for those of you who are watching this live, again, what I always do is I try and break up some of the questions with a little bit of fun and try and build together some interesting bits. So I'm now going to give you, Cecilia, so 10 words, and you've got to try and use a word, but I might give you a little bit of flexibility. So let's just go through them. So PropTech, what's the word associated with PropTech for you?
1 in a million.
It's not one word in a million, though.
Just hyphenated, and that's it.
Oh, I see. That gets away with it. Right, got you. What about, we've talked about it a lot already, innovation.
Ideas.
What about leadership?
Empowering.
See, you're walking this. There's no argument here. Culture. Positive. Cool. What about ESG?
Collaboration.
Customer.
Experience.
Customer and experience. What did you mean by that?
Well, I had to think about that for a second because your customer at the end of the day is someone who you need to provide a service, right? And in today's day and age, how do you, especially for us in retail, right? One of the things that we really are thinking about, and not just in retail, I'm sorry, it's also in residential and office, right? The way to attract these customers is by providing an experience that they want to receive. And that is top of mind for all of us. And by experience, we're not just talking about the digital experience, it's the experience as a whole, the physical experience, the visual experience, the digital experience. I mean, it's your 5 senses, really.
It is, especially, and that is it's a really interesting point. As soon as I said, can you expand on what you mean by experience with the customer, I suddenly went back to that whole point of what Urban Edge is all about, which is the retail environments, and as a consequence, of course, I mean, experience is absolutely pivotal in the whole thing. So I'm now really interested then as to what word you associate with competitor.
Partner.
Partner. Okay. So again, I'm interested, and I want to dive into that because I do hear that a lot with people saying ally, friend, partner, collaborator. How do you see that as a partnership with competitors?
Look, I think in real estate, this is a small, very small industry, if you think about it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I like most about this industry is that we talk and we learn from each other, and we don't just share our successes, we also share our failures, right? I mean, why would I want you to fail the same way I failed? Right?
Yeah.
And it's not like we're sharing a secret sauce, right? We're just sharing a particular instant. And look, let's face it, the success of a real estate company doesn't lie in technology only, right? It's a whole a set of metrics that makes a real estate company successful.
No,
And so,
I agree.
yeah.
And
So
I
that's
think,
why for me, a competitor, I can think of so many people right now at the top of my head who actually have been so good to me and so knowledgeable, so much wealth of information and so generous in sharing.
yeah, I agree. So last two, data.
Raw.
And finally, strategy.
NOI.
Everything leads back to NOI. Okay, so another little sort of a flippant one. I'm always interested in reading and books that people are reading. So I'm really interested in the books that you would recommend another leader to read, and why would you recommend that book?
It's called Unleash, the
Okay.
unapologetic leader's guide to empowering everyone around you.
Cool. Who wrote that? Do you know?
Let me take I can probably find it.
Hang on.
Let's see. Francis Frey.
Oh,
And
yeah,
Anne
there we are.
Morris.
Yeah. And Anne Morris,
Mhm.
got you. The
Mhm.
Unapologetic Leader's Guide to Empowering Everyone Around You. Cool, like that. Okay. I shall check that out. But and in fact, why is that? Just simply because of your belief around the concept of building your sort of team, your village, as you call it, and working with everybody. Is that the main protagonist?
Yes, but there's an art to that, and a lot of people don't empower people because they fear. Uh, well, there could be many reasons. One is, I can do this all by myself. That's one way of thinking. The other one is fear. I'm like, of why should we let all these people make all these crazy decisions. But what I found is that when you empower people around you, what you're creating is a sea of knowledge, of share experiences that really add add valuable things to whatever you're working on. And it doesn't have to be, people that are all at the top. I mean, if you really should empower people from top to bottom. And to my delight, we've had such a great experience at Urban Edge because we really have that in our culture. And it's not just within technology, it's around the organization.
And I love your point there about shared knowledge of the experiences that people have gone through, because it's not just, if someone makes a mistake in doing something, it's not just about them learning, it's everybody else learning from what they've done. So I totally understand that concept. So I would like to really now press and move forward in terms of the lessons that you've learned on this transformation journey, let's say, that you've been on with Urban Edge. So what is that biggest lesson that you've learned over time?
Okay. I can think of a few things. One is that people will embrace if you truly solve their problems and you can show them how you can make their world better. you have to use their language, not the IT lingo with acronyms. And know that it's going to be difficult, the journey, and that you need to be patient, and it is a process. And lastly but not least, people don't like change, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of it is to manage change. And you need to, we talked about it, when you need to involve people throughout the project to make sure that ahead of the game, if there's something that's wrong, that's something that's not working, and you need to address it right away. When you really address people's concerns right away, people feel acknowledged, people feel like they really are part of it, and then they'll give you even more of themselves.
Yeah. And I'm pleased you've touched back on that word people, because funnily enough, I'd actually written it down from earlier on when we talked about the sort of what role does innovation play with Urban Edge. And you mentioned about, people being absolutely core and fundamental, as much as NOI, you said. And I'm pleased you've sort of come back to that. And so when you talk about managing change, which effectively is just managing people well, how have you gone about managing change for them? Is there any recommendations you might be able to give or examples you might give there?
Well, how? So I think the first thing to acknowledge, right, as a leader going through this journey, it's that you need to remember that you're not changing technology, right? That you're changing the behavior of somebody in getting something done, right? So you need to get people to buy into that change. And so I mentioned earlier, it is critical that you involve people in that journey from the very beginning to the very end. I mentioned earlier having monthly meetings. That's just a status update, right? But having them involved from the discovery phase all the way to user acceptance testing, right? Because then they know all the obstacles that you're facing, right? When you're discovering, all you're saying is, tell me what your problems are, or tell me what your needs are, and within your needs, what is it that we're solving? And as you're going through the discovery and you're saying, okay, here are some iterations and here's some milestones, right? Uh, and they go through the testing process of it, they really get to feel and live what you're doing. And then all of a sudden, they're just part of it. And they're telling the other people, no, you can't do this until we test it. And by the way, the data is not accurate. We need to make sure that the data is accurate before we go live. We go live. What's funny is just yesterday I was talking to one of our leasing people, and that leasing person was talking to someone who's new to the organization and perhaps not familiar yet with our culture and our process. And the new person said, well, I'm just a little bit worried because, what if this is going to affect this other department and that other department? And the leasing person said, don't worry, Cecilia is going to include everyone that needs to be included. You just need to wait. The fact that person said that, let's digest that for a second, right? Or unpack that for a second. It's people in our organization have gotten accustomed to a process, and we've basically built this process, and every single project that we work on follows that same process. So to the point that now you've built expectations. People know what to expect. People know what the process is, and now they feel confidence because they know what is the next step after, and then what is the outcome. And so, I mean, for us, that's how we've built buy-in, by communicating and by building repeatable processes that people can understand.
It's almost like you're shifting that psychology of control to the people that are involved, really, so that it gives them a semblance of comfort that they have an input, and as a consequence of almost feeling like they've got input and control, they then feel comfortable with the process that they're going through. Because part of the challenge with transformation I've often seen is that people feel wholly out of control because they're being they're being tested on things that they don't necessarily understand too much. So
100%.
it sounds like you're giving them that comfort by giving them the semblance of control over not necessarily decisions, but input into those decisions being made.
100%.
Cool. I think it's a really interesting answer that. Just while we're here, I know there's been a few questions that have come through. Just actually to go back to reference Nazim, he says he's just realised that Urban Edge is dealing with shopping centres. So some of his questions, which I have seen, Nazim, are quite specific, perhaps not that relevant this time round, but it doesn't matter. But any of you who've got any comments or questions, just drop them in. I'm not expecting many, but if there are some, please, I'll always bring them and put them to Cecilia at the end of all of this. So one of the things that I'm really interested in discovering, and we've had this long talk about the lessons that you've learned from the transformation journey. So lessons are quite easy to talk about. You did say earlier on that you're quite it's a shared responsibility when mistakes are made and everybody learns from them. But have you got any examples of where mistakes you've made as a company or perhaps in your role on the transformation journey? What have they been? Have you got any examples there?
No, we're perfect. We don't make mistakes.
Of course. Do you know what? The whole industry is perfect as well.
No, look, I think I somewhat said it earlier, right? We have to include the business in the decision making and the design of any solution.
Yeah.
As an example, when we were building our business intelligence platform, right? The business said, we live and breathe through this report. And we're like, well, look, we're going to do this business intelligence tool, and it's going to be fantastic, and it has visuals, and it has everything that you need, and with one click, it's going to give you all these different iterations, right? And you can dissect it in many different ways. So off we go. We build the solution, business intelligence. I mean, we're pretty responsible with the way we build. We didn't spend millions of dollars, right? This is more like a proof of concept. And we come back with this business intelligence visual, right? And it was garbage. Our leasing team, our CFO, they ripped it apart, right?
No.
And it was just, something as simple as there's some things you just really can't change that drastically, and you really ought to take them in the journey. Look, business intelligence, it's a topic that was new not long ago, right? And to take somebody from an Excel report that's, millions of rows, right, and columns of information to something visual, that's a pretty drastic change, right?
Yeah.
And so you really have to include the business in all of the decision making and all of the design.
Cecilia, going back a step then on that as a specific mistake that was made, I'm really interested into why it was a mistake. Not don't mean that, and because the why was that you didn't communicate, but the feedback that you got because you hadn't communicated with them about your intentions. Was it that you built this, lovely, beautiful dashboard that looked amazing, but actually didn't solve a problem that existed? Or was it that the data you were bringing in was just displaying in a terrible way because you weren't appreciating what those people used the data for? What was so bad about it?
I think this was the classic example of if you ask two different people to draw a house with clouds and flowers in a tree, right? People's take of what that picture is going to look like, it's going to be different. It's going to be similar but somewhat different, right? And now if you ask them to draw something completely more complex, right? Forget it. You get two different complete pictures. And I think this was a classic example of, two different teams looking at a set of data from completely different lenses, right? And thinking that the solution was going to work, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Not so much for the lack of communication, but it was more like, I think this is this is the same thing, which is not.
Yeah, you can't solve everything with one dashboard. No, I totally
Yeah.
understand. So I suppose moving on, and again, for those of you who are watching this as a long stream, this is quite sort of segmented and structured. So we kind of jump around a little bit, and we often repeat things. Just to see, you'll find us sometimes go back and say, and this is with Urban Edge, who've got 17 million square feet of space. So I may jump back and forth a little bit.
Now, may I just offer another mistake that we've made through the transformation journey?
Sure, absolutely.
I think
So actually, I'm just going to put this back up because Ella, who helps me with all of my editing, I'm now going to have to say, Ella, I've actually put the same question up twice because there's mistake part 2. So, come on, tell me, what's the second mistake?
I think it comes to. I'll tell you how we fix a mistake, or what the lesson learned is to partner with the right vendor, right? Because
Yeah.
not one vendor has all the skills or the right skills, and really you ought to find vendors that are or partners as we call them, right? That really get who you are, that really knows their stuff, and that sometimes they know where the skill sets of your vendor start and where they end, right? Because not one vendor can do it all.
So the mistake you've made before was that you haven't always selected the right vendor on cultural grounds as well as solution grounds. Is that what it is?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's just something as simple as not having the same speed as you do, right? And that's important, right? Because if think about your journey, your digital transformation journey. If you have an executive team that's really hungry, right? Have a big appetite for transformation journey, and then all of a sudden you have a team that is not in the same speed, or is in the same speed as you do. Now your deliverers start falling apart, and now the perception from the client standpoint, it's, well, you're just not delivering fast enough, right? So it does impact your journey. It does impact the perception, and ultimately the buy-in and the success of your journey, of your digital transformation.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there now, because again, the mistakes that you've made, relating back to an earlier discussion about your biggest frustrations on the innovation journey around cost, time, and buy-in, is if, as you may have done before, you've selected the wrong vendor, which in turn has then increased costs, increased time, and weakened your potential buy-in for future projects. So
that's correct.
Makes perfect sense. Sorry, Ella, for the extra edit on that one. But I love that sort of stuff. It's always nice when you can throw it in a little bit and mix it up.
Sorry.
So, I'd like to sort of just go back a step a little bit in terms of that role that you have as a CIO at Urban Edge. And, when you're dealing with 17 million square feet and you've got 70 plus buildings, how are you prioritizing sort of the innovation initiatives that you run? What are those priorities? It would be really interesting to hear your side on that.
Yeah, especially when you're in a budgeting time, right? That's when we exercise these priorities, right?
And like 150 plus employees as well. They must all have demand. So, what's that journey look like?
Look, I think ultimately we're always talking about what moves the needle. That's number one. And number two is if it's related to governance and security. That's really important for us as an organization as well.
Sorry, just go back for me, Cecilia. I missed that first one. So the governance I got was the second one. What was the first one?
What moves the needle? Again, we're talking about the bottom line, right? It has to be something that's impactful, that creates value, that generates efficiencies. And then the second part is governance and security.
So let me I'm really interested in that first part on there. Mm-hmm. Because how do you assign value and efficiency in an innovation thing, because quite often in initiatives like this, you have to be looking at a longer term shift rather than a short term shift, because it may not work in the short term. So how can you assess that priority on the values and the efficiency side? What's your measure on that? Is it, is there a time frame on moving the needle, or is it we just have to be able to prove that something is happening? How are you calculating that bit?
Well, when you talk about moving the needle, some things are tangible, some things are intangible, right? So like efficiency, right? It's I'm gonna call it. Sometimes you can attach it to dollars, sometimes you can't. And so, it's how many hours from somebody are you taking away of mundane work so that they can focus on true work that will impact the organization.
Right.
So that's from a what's the word that we were using? Efficiency standpoint, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, we always have to ask ourselves, what is it, or what are we solving? Why are we solving it? Who are we benefiting, or who's going to be benefiting? Who's going to be accountable for this, right? And when are we going to look to implement this, right? So when we're talking about priorities, we always follow kind of this fill in the blanks, right? And and then decide, right? There's so much out there, right? There's so many products, and if a business comes to me and say, we have this problem, if it's a big problem or it requires call it a platform, right?
Yeah.
We go into the discovery process, and you really have to really know what the needs are of the organization, and then funnel it through all the questions that I mentioned earlier. And I said earlier, we have a project request form that actually it's filled out by the business, and the business must prove, right, that they're able to fulfill all of these buckets. And the intention, by the way, is not just for the sake of having somebody fill out a form, right? The intention of the form is to create a committee that will really think about this, right? Because we are not looking to spend haphazardly, right? Like if we're going to do something, it better make a difference in our organization.
That's really, it's a very interesting way of doing it, and almost as much for you as for anyone else. There's some really interesting, some of the interviews I've already done with people who do things in a slightly different but similar way. I would advise you watching the Great Portland Estates interview, where James and Ella talk about how they have their innovation committees. Mm-hmm. And they call, sorry, no, the other way around. They have what they call innovation champions. And I think 25% of their organization, and it's a very similar size to yours, are the people that have the sort of the say on the products and how they gauge that. And then there's also the one with, who was it? PGIM, a bit of a larger organization where they have these innovation committees which are set around learning all of that as well. So for those of you who are watching this edit, do look at the PGIM interviews and the GPE interviews, because there's a similar discussion around that, which would be, I think, would be particularly interesting for you.
Yeah, and for us, our committee is on prioritizing within the department, right? It's within the department, right? So for us, our finance team, they love technology, right? And every year when we're on the budgeting season, right, it's a whole spreadsheet of all the projects that we're thinking that we're going to do the following year. And when I have, what we do as a team, right, finance and the technology team, is we sit together and say, okay, let's assess what is the priority, right? And the priority, again, is on what moves the needle or what is for security or governance aspects. So within each department, we do that as well.
Really interesting. So before I bring this question up, on this one now. Cecilia, in terms of ESG, are you happy for me to ask you a question about ESG? Is that fair enough?
Sure.
Yeah, cool. Where are we? Here we go. So Cecilia, in some of the questions that we've already talked about so far, you've talked about justifying innovation strategies and sort of decisions that the company makes, Urban Edge Properties, around moving the needle, and that's looking at increasing value and increasing efficiencies. And so I'm really interested in terms of the sort of the topic of the moment, which is this ESG movement that we're starting to see within the property companies in particular. So, what's the attitude of Urban Edge to ESG? What are the sorts of strategies or the pledges that you guys are putting towards this movement?
Yeah. Well, on the S, right, and the G, let me talk about that for a second.
Thank you for starting with the S. That's brilliant. Everyone always starts with the E because it's so easy.
Well,
but the S and the G are the hard ones. So good, go for it.
Right. Well, look, the E, it's a lot of people. You have tons of material on that, right?
Yeah.
But on the S, right? Our CEO signed the Action for Diversity and Equity and Inclusion this year. And we have a lot of different activities around the wellness. We're implementing the wellness of our organization, the people. We have an impressive program that our fantastic HR team and ESG, the social, the DEI committee has put together. But on the wellness side, right, we just had a webinar yesterday that addresses health for women, right? That talks about, what should you be doing at certain stage of your life? What should you be aware of as a woman, right, from a health standpoint? Then we also have the fun stuff, right? Like the ice cream truck. Apparently, a lot of people do ice cream trucks. I shared with you earlier that we won the New Jersey best place to work in New Jersey, right? And we were number 12. And part of that, it was a lot of these social engagements that we've done with relationship to wellness and tenant engagement. The community engagement. We did recently. We partnered with Rap for Bronx, where we fed people in need in the community, and we provided 2 million meals for the community, for the people that are in need. And I think that was remarkable. We really are taking this very seriously. But I was talking about the best places to work because apparently I learned yesterday that a lot of these companies love ice cream day. Something so simple and silly, but so appreciative, because people feel like they are being thought about. It's no longer about, you're an employee, you got to work 9 to 5, and it is what it is. It is a community at the end of the day. We have like cappuccino or espresso day, but there's that. On the
but just to finish on that, it's not hard, the S part, but it's the fluffy bit. It's the bit which I should think a lot of the C-suite really don't want to think they have to have meetings about. And yet it's probably one of the most important aspects of a company's responsibility, because as company leaders, we have a duty of care and a responsibility to our employees, whoever they are, at whatever stage of life they are, which is why, by the way, I really love that, that discussion around women in the workplace and that stuff, because, a lot of things each side of the sexes, they don't understand of each other, and all that inclusivity side around it as well. So, it is a difficult side, the S bit, and I often think it is forgotten. So, here for Ice Cream Day, all over the place, and I'm pretty sure. Sort of the E side of that, I know there are statements on the website as well, because I've seen you've got an ESG strategy within your web site. So if anyone is interested on how Urban Edge are dealing with that, then I encourage you to go to their website and have a look around from there as well. So it makes for very interesting reading. So I'm just going to come back to one last question, I think, on this now, Cecilia, just to finish this all off, if that's all right. And I suppose one of the things I'm really interested in is, lastly, to look at that initial PropTech innovation, digital transformation, ESG strategy. How are they developed at Urban Edge? How are they evolved at Urban Edge? And ultimately, who is responsible? Is it people like yourself in terms of that SVP layer? Does it come from the very top CEO level? Is it driven everywhere? How is it developed, and who takes responsibility for it all?
I mean, they're two very different journeys. And so I'm going to, since we were just talking on the ESG, right, we have an ESG committee, and it's comprised of many different people in the organization. Ours is spearheaded by one of our VP of asset management, but it's in collaboration with the likes of our general counsel, our HR, our property managers, our acquisitions team, our CFO, myself from a technology standpoint and governance, as well as on the social, on the vendor risk management, right? What else do we have? Our development team, right? So it is comprised of a whole committee. The team itself, those are the ones that are making the decisions. But in terms of actual working on the projects that arises from those decisions, it's pretty much the entire organization.
So a true holistic perspective. And very early on in this, you talked about there's an element of outsourcing of the tech operations as well. Is that in terms of the development of, or is that, do you have consultants that come in and help you on certain areas? Can you just explain how that outsourcing supports and helps the strategy development as well?
Yeah, for our ESG, we have a consultant that kind of guides us through the ESG journey. It is a very new topic for many organizations, and we feel that we want to leverage the expertise of a company that lives and breathes ESG, right?
Yeah.
On the technology side, we don't rely on the technology side so much on the tell us how to do this journey, but it's more about leveraging that knowledge for different aspects within our organization. So like, for instance, our development team, it's completely outsourced, right? For us, in fact, it was a big change for me because I came from organizations where we had an entire team in-house, right? And that was actually my first challenge in my journey, digital journey transformation, because I'm like, what do you mean? I can't do this without a team of I need an army to do this. You're giving me a fork to lift this mountain. But what I've learned is, I grabbed the bull by the horns and I'm like, you know what, we're going to be able to do this. And what I learned is that, and I mentioned that earlier, you ought to find partners that truly get you as an organization and get you as a leader, right? And that we need to be speaking the same language. They need to understand what your goals are. I can't tell you how many times a vendor will come to you and say, let me tell you what you need. And so our entire development team, it's outsourced, and also our infrastructure team is outsourced as well as our cybersecurity. But that those teams that I've outsourced, think of them as outsourced, but they're very much part of our organization, and they're very much part of the process. And between them, they collaborate as well.
Yeah, of course, and that makes sense. And I think there's a growing sort of positivity about that sort of arrangement as well. So that does make a lot of sense to outsource, especially on that ESG side. As you say, it is relatively well known. I expect it to be considerably better known in coming years as we start to see things like executive pay pinned to ESG initiatives and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's very wise to outsource all that sort of stuff. So thank you for the input on that question. I appreciate that. And I think in reality, I'm conscious that to be honest, without really talking, Cecilia, you and I have gone on for an awful long time, and I don't want to take up any more of your time, but genuinely a big thank you to some of the Molcom team, including Liz from the US operations, who put us in contact as a referral for having this discussion. And I'm gonna end the live stream now, just because I think it's the right thing to do for everybody if they are still watching. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you in the green room, Cecilia. But thank you
so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Good.